I learned very early that silence is the only true gift a person can give themselves. Silence is patient, silence is merciless, silence doesn't lie. That is why when I move through the night, I let silence be the cloak I wear. It wraps me, muffles me, carries me so close that no one hears. She doesn't hear. That is the most exquisite part. She moves in her world, blissfully unaware that mine overlaps hers every single night. My world is built in the shadows of her home, in the cracks of her curtains, in the reflective glass of her windows. I watch, and I collect her in pieces, and every piece is mine. I discovered her by accident, if accidents can ever truly exist. Some might call it coincidence. I call it inevitability. She lived 2 streets over, in a house that looked plain enough from the outside, white paint flaking at the corners, a porch light that flickered as though begging to be replaced, the same recycling bin sitting out by the curb 3 days too long. The kind of house you walk past without remembering. But I remembered. I remembered because the first time I passed it, I caught her silhouette in the upstairs window. The frame of her body against a dim lamp, her arms moving as she pulled her sweater over her head. There was nothing lewd in the moment, nothing base, just the unguarded ease of someone who thought they were unseen. That was what caught me. That was what made me stop. That was the moment the world gave her to me. The routines revealed themselves slowly, like secrets unraveling, each night telling me a little more about her. She left her blinds tilted just enough for me to catch glimpses. She always came home around the same time, a little before 8, her hair damp some nights when she'd clearly showered at the gym. Other times she stopped by the store and came back with bags that sagged heavy with groceries. She never locked the gate to her yard, though she did lock the door to the house, and that detail told me everything about her trust. She trusted the world to leave her be. She believed herself safe. That trust glowed in her every move. That glow was mine. The first night I watched her fully, I crouched by the tree in her front yard, its branches low and thick enough to cast a dense shadow over me. She made pasta, humming to herself, swaying to a rhythm in her head. She boiled water, poured sauce into a pan, stirred absent-mindedly as though cooking was muscle memory. She didn't taste the sauce before sitting down with her bowl in front of the TV. She watched something loud, bright colors flashing across the screen, the noise drowning out the little creaks and sighs her house made. I could hear them, though. I always hear the things people ignore. I let myself sink into them, into the creak of the kitchen pipes, the shift of the floorboards above the basement, the hum of the refrigerator, the music of her home, the sound of her life. That was the first night I knew the pull was real, the tether tying me to her. I began to follow her outside the house, too. I don't think she ever noticed me behind her, though once, when we both turned onto Main Street, I thought her head lifted like she sensed something. My chest filled with the heat of panic, but her eyes slid past me without recognition. She never even turned again. Her steps kept the same rhythm, her hands in her pockets. I walked far enough behind that I was only another stranger in the night. That night she bought apples. She smiled politely at the cashier. The man didn't deserve that smile, not when he didn't understand what it meant. I understood. I memorized the exact tilt of her lips, the way her eyes softened as though she was doing him a kindness by letting him see her joy. I collected that smile. It belonged to me now. The nights deepened. Her patterns became bones of my own schedule. I knew when she went to sleep, usually after midnight, lights going dark one by one until only the faint glow of her phone remained in the upstairs window. I imagined her scrolling, her eyes heavy, her hair splayed across the pillow. I knew when she woke, sometimes before sunrise, dragging herself out of bed to make coffee she drank in a chipped white mug. She wore baggy sweatshirts in the morning, her hair pulled back messily, her feet bare against the kitchen tile. She didn't bother with curtains when the sun rose, and that trust of hers filled me with something I can't describe. To be let in without permission, to be invited simply because she didn't know I was there. That is more intimate than touch, more powerful than words. I lived in the seconds between her movements. I learned her life the way you learn the back of your hand, by tracing it over and over until every line is familiar. It's not that I wanted to hurt her. Not at first. One is too shallow a word for the need that grew inside me. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't lust. It was inevitability. She was mine because I chose her, because the world had been itself that night I first saw her silhouette and whispered, "Here, this one." I didn't break that whisper. I nurtured it. I fed it with silence. Every night I fed it more. I grew fat on her laughter, her sighs, the sound of her pacing when she talked on the phone. She had a friend, a woman she spoke to often, sometimes for hours. I hated the friend's voice. It cluttered her purity. But I listened anyway because through it I learned her cadences, the rhythm of her words when she was happy, when she was tired, when she was lonely. And she was lonely more often than she would admit to anyone else. I saw it in the way she paused sometimes, staring at her phone like she wished it would ring. I saw it in the way she lingered in the living room after shows ended, unwilling to go to bed, yet unwilling to stay awake. Loneliness dripped off her like dew. That loneliness called me closer. She might never admit it, but she needed me. She needs me. The first time I stepped into her yard was a test. The grass brushed against my shins as I crept across it, her porch light buzzing faintly above. I stood on her porch, my hand inches from the door. My heart thrashed, so loud I thought surely she'd hear it. But no, she was upstairs, her shadow moving against the curtains. I leaned my forehead against the door, the wood cool against my skin, and I closed my eyes. For a moment it felt like the house was breathing with me. I swear I could hear her footsteps above, as though she were pacing directly above me. That closeness made my skin hum. I didn't knock. I didn't break in. Not then. That night wasn't for that. That night was to prove I could stand at the threshold of her world, unseen, and still belong. After that, it became easier. Nights blurred together in the way only obsession can blur them, where you don't know the day or the hour, but only the pulse of the person you're tied to. I left little marks, though she didn't notice. A pebble shifted on her porch, a smudge on her window from where my glove brushed against the glass. A tiny shift of her garden gnome from one side of the step to the other. She never saw, or maybe she did and explained it away. People always explain things away when the truth is too heavy. That's the beauty of watching. I see everything she doesn't want to. I see the pieces she discards. I gather them like relics. One night it rained, and the storm turned her house into a lantern. Every flash of lightning revealed her inside, the curtains drawn back as though she wanted the world to look in. She sat curled up on the couch with a blanket, her knees pulled to her chest, the glow of the TV bouncing across her face. I stood at the edge of her yard, drenched, my shoes sinking into the mud, but I couldn't move. The storm lashed at me, but it only made the sight sharper, cleaner. She looked like something sacred then, lit by both man-made glow and natural fury. I whispered to myself, barely louder than the rain, words I didn't even know I carried. I'm here. I'm with you. You don't see me, but you will. Someday you will. The first time she reacted was weeks later. I had pressed my face so close to the window I could see the outline of her couch cushions. She was laughing at something on her phone, her head tilted back, her throat bare. The sight of her neck stretched like that, it was unbearable. Not in pain, but in longing, in the ache of how much of her life I wanted in my hands. And then suddenly she froze. Her head jerked toward the window, toward me. Her eyes met the glass as though she had heard something, as though she felt the shift in the air. My lungs stopped. For a moment, everything stilled. The hum of her refrigerator, the flicker of the lamp, the blood in my veins. She stared for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then she shook her head. She laughed again, softer, nervously. She pulled the curtain shut. That was the moment she became real. Not just a figure, not just a silhouette, but someone who felt the ripple of me against her world. She had sensed me. She had known, even if she told herself otherwise. That was the first crack in her certainty. And cracks always spread. The night after, she double-checked the locks. I watched her from the tree as she went door to door, testing each one. She closed the curtains tighter, tugged them until no light seeped through. But she forgot the upstairs bathroom window. She always forgets one thing. That's how I know she's human. That's how I know I'll always find her. I stood outside that bathroom window for hours, listening to her shower, to the water hitting tile, to the soft hum of her voice as she sang to herself. I stayed until the steam fogged the glass, until her shadow disappeared behind it. I stayed until silence wrapped around me again. And I whispered once more, "You don't see me, but you will." She didn't sleep that night. I know because I didn't either. I perched in the wet grass by her fence, the rain still clinging to the air from the storm 2 nights before, and I watched the glow of her bedroom window shift from bright to dim to black, and then back again. Hours passed. She would turn off her lamp, only to flick it back on within minutes. Curtains swayed with her restless hands. She paced the length of her room, shadows stretching and collapsing like ink poured across the walls. She looked behind herself more than once, her movements twitching with a stiffness I hadn't seen before. It thrilled me, the way her body finally acknowledged me, the way her mind whispered to her that something was wrong even if her mouth didn't dare shape the words. That unease was the first true connection between us. The silence I had nurtured had cracked into sound, her breath quickening, her heart racing, her head turning at shadows. She had felt me, and though she might lie to herself, she could not unfeel it. The next morning, her routine faltered. No gym, no grocery stop. She drove straight home, her car pulling into the driveway like a hunted animal rushing into its burrow. She clutched her bag close to her chest as she climbed the steps, her eyes darting across the yard, the street, the tree where I sometimes stood. I had already melted into the deeper dark, watching from where she couldn't see. The way her gaze slid past me, frantic but blind, made my blood thrum. She knew now. She didn't know what, she didn't know who, but she knew. Her trust had been fractured, and that made her even more beautiful. Fear sharpens everything. It strips away the dullness of routine. It makes every gesture precious. Every movement is louder when it is tinged with dread. That night, I moved closer, closer than I had ever dared before. I pressed myself against the siding of her house, beneath her living room window. Through the thin separation of wall and wood, I could hear her phone call. She was speaking to the same friend, her voice pitched higher than usual, brittle like glass under pressure. She said she felt strange. She said she thought someone had been outside. She said she saw something. She laughed after, the kind of laugh that isn't laughter at all but a bandage for fear. The friend tried to soothe her, told her she was imagining it. But I heard the tremor in her words when she insisted she wasn't. She said, "I know someone's watching me." And I nearly pressed my lips against the wall, nearly whispered back, "Yes." Instead, I left her something. A gift, small and simple but undeniable. A single daisy from her own garden, plucked carefully, its stem still damp with dew. I laid it on her porch, directly in front of her door. Not tossed, not random. Placed with intention. Centered, perfect, waiting for her eyes. I didn't stay to see her reaction in the morning. I didn't need to. I could imagine it clearly enough. The pause, the frown, the way her stomach would drop at the sight of something so ordinary and yet so wrong. Because she hadn't picked it. Because she hadn't put it there. Because someone had crossed into her world and touched it. I touched it. That day she called the police. I watched them arrive, two men in uniform strolling lazily through her yard as though they were humoring her. They knocked on her door, stepped inside, voices low and dismissive. I could almost hear them telling her it was nothing, telling her flowers don't mean danger, telling her shadows are just shadows. She stood in the doorway as they left, her arms crossed over her chest, her face tight. They didn't take her seriously. But I did. I always did. That is the difference between them and me. That is why she belongs to me and not them. When night came, she closed every curtain, every single one. But curtains are fragile things, fabric meant to block light, not eyes. I stood by the back of the house where her kitchen window hung slightly crooked on its hinge. There was always a sliver of space where the curtain didn't quite meet the frame. Through that sliver I saw her move through the kitchen with a kind of stiffness, every step deliberate. She double-checked the locks again. She slid a chair under the doorknob. She thought it would keep her safe. I wanted to laugh. Safety is a story people tell themselves, a lullaby for the foolish. But I didn't laugh. I just watched. I pressed my fingertip lightly against the glass, tracing the shape of her outline as she passed. She didn't see me, not then. But I felt her anyway. I always do. I wanted her to know me more, to feel me more. So I began to leave more gifts. Not obvious, never loud, always small enough to be doubted, but precise enough to be real. A folded piece of paper with nothing on it, slipped between her screen door and the frame. A button from my coat left on her windowsill. A single black feather placed on her pillow while she showered. I watched from the hallway that night, just inside her house for the first time, my breath shallow, my body pressed flat against the wall. The sound of water pounded from above, drowning everything. My feet whispered across her carpet. I stood in her bedroom for less than a minute, but it was enough. The air smelled of her, faint perfume, laundry detergent, warmth. I set the feather down with care, as though crowning her bed with a secret. Then I slipped back out before the water stopped. The thrill of it kept my skin buzzing for hours, and when she found it later, I knew she would not be able to pretend anymore. Not truly. She could pull the covers tighter, lock the doors harder, call her friend 10 more times, but the truth had already seeped in. I was with her. I was always with her. Her paranoia grew delicious. She jumped at sounds. She looked out the window 3, 4, 5 times before stepping outside. She carried her phone with her everywhere, her fingers tight around it like a weapon. Once, she even shouted into the darkness, a sharp and desperate sound. "I know you're there." I stood 10 feet away, silent, watching her breath fog in the night air. She waited, shaking, eyes scanning. But silence is my skin. Silence held me, and she saw nothing. She went back inside, locking the door so hard the glass rattled. I smiled into the dark, because shouting into emptiness only makes the emptiness answer louder. And she was beginning to understand that. But fear has a taste, and I craved more. The silence between us needed to sharpen into something undeniable. So one night, I left her something she couldn't ignore. Not a flower, not a feather, something that whispered too close to her bones. On her porch, I placed a photograph, taken from the tree across the yard. Her in her living room, head bent over her phone, hair falling across her face. The photo was dark, grainy, but her shape was clear. And more than that, it was from the angle of her window. It was proof. Proof she had never asked for. Proof she could never unsee. That night she screamed. I heard it from the street where I stood, low against the curb. A sharp, piercing sound that sent a thrill through me so strong it almost doubled me over. She screamed again, and then lights flared on across the neighborhood, windows sliding open as curious faces peeked out. I melted back into shadow, watching. She stood on her porch, clutching the photograph in her hand, her face pale and twisted with terror. She called the police again, and this time they searched. They swept the yard with flashlights, combed through bushes, even checked the tree. They didn't find me. They never will. I don't live in the spaces they search. I live in the spaces between. She stopped sleeping after that. I know because I stopped too. Her bedroom light burned longer now, her figure pacing behind the curtains. She pulled them tight, taped the edges even, but there was always a slip, always a seam. I saw her sit on the floor with her back against the door, as though she could keep me out with her own body. I saw her clutch her phone, dialing and redialing the same number. I saw her cry, and though part of me ached with something like tenderness, another part of me swelled with victory. Tears are truth. Fear is truth. She could not deny me anymore. She knew. She knows. The whispers began then, though I never spoke them out loud. I whispered in the way I moved, in the way I left her world slightly shifted each night. The kitchen chair angled differently. The closet door cracked open half an inch. A strand of hair taped to her bathroom mirror. Tiny, intimate things, the kind only someone close could know, the kind only I could leave. Every night I left her a question she could not answer. Every morning she woke to proof she was not alone. The silence between us was gone. Now there was only the rhythm of her terror and my devotion. And then came the night that changed everything. The night she stopped pretending. The night she said it out loud. I was crouched by her back door, my hand on the cold glass, my breath fogging faintly against it. Inside, she sat at her kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook, and then in a voice hoarse and raw, she whispered, "Please stop. Please just stop." For a moment, even the house went still. No hum of the refrigerator, no creak of the floorboards. Just her voice, small and broken, bleeding through the dark. She wasn't on the phone. She wasn't talking to her friend. She was talking to me. She couldn't see me, but she knew I was there. And that was the first time I smiled so wide it hurt. Because the silence was finally broken. Because she had finally spoken to me. Because she finally admitted the truth I had known all along. She knew I was watching. She knew I was always there. And soon, she would know what that really meant. She spoke to me, and nothing was the same after that. The moment those words spilled from her lips, even whispered, the air between us changed. The silence I had carefully built for weeks shattered, but not into emptiness, into music. The sweetest sound I had ever heard, her acknowledgement. She didn't say my name. She doesn't know my name. But she doesn't need to. Names are flimsy, replaceable things. What matters is presence, and she had confessed she felt mine. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. For the next 3 nights, I didn't leave her anything. I didn't shift her world. I didn't touch her door. I didn't step across her porch. I only watched. I let her stew in the absence of proof. Let her wonder if she had imagined me. Let her mind spin in circles, trying to reconcile the fear inside her with the silence outside. I watched her pace, watched her hesitate before turning off lights, watched her eyes scan every window before pulling the curtains shut. The absence of my touch was as loud as my presence had been. She never relaxed. She never smiled. She never stopped looking over her shoulder. That was my gift to her, the truth that she could never return to the world she lived in before me. The truth that safety was nothing more than a myth she had believed until I came along to tear it apart. On the fourth night, I returned inside. Slipping through the back door was easier than I expected. She had replaced the locks, but locks are only as strong as the hands that turn them. Tools make all things soft. I moved through her kitchen like a shadow that had finally broken free of the walls. Her air filled my lungs, her warmth seeped into my skin. Every surface begged to be touched, every corner hummed with her presence. I didn't go upstairs. Not yet. I stood in her living room, surrounded by the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the sharper edge of her fear. On the coffee table lay a stack of police flyers, safety tips, neighborhood watch nonsense, hollow words printed on cheap paper. I ran my finger down the edge of them, then left a smudge, a mark of myself. Not destruction, not harm, just a reminder that their words meant nothing, that I was here and no flyer could protect her. That night, she woke screaming. I hadn't even made a sound. I hadn't touched a thing, but something in her had shifted. Some part of her that had always known me finally roused itself. She sat up in bed, gasping, clutching the sheets to her chest, her eyes wild as they scanned the dark. She turned on the lamp and stumbled to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. I was gone by then, already back in the yard, but I saw her face framed by the glass. Pale, terrified, a face cracked open by realization. She knew. She knew I had been inside. She could feel me in the air, in the walls, in her bed. She knew. The following days were chaos. She missed work. She called her friend again and again, her voice trembling through the walls as she begged for someone to stay with her. The friend came once, stayed the night, slept on the couch. I hated it. I hated the intrusion, the way she tried to insert herself into the world that belonged to me. But even that couldn't break the truth. Even with company, she was unsettled. She still jumped at every creak, every sigh of the house. She still pulled the curtains too tight. And when the friend finally left, the relief that washed over me was almost too much to bear. She was mine again, alone, vulnerable, beautiful. So I decided to give her the final gift. Not another flower, not another feather, not another photograph. Something she could never deny, something that would etch itself into her memory forever. Proof beyond proof. I waited until she slept, restless, shallow sleep that barely clung to her. I slipped through the back door again, my steps lighter than breath. Upstairs, her bedroom door creaked faintly, but she didn't stir. I stood at the foot of her bed, watching her chest rise and fall, watching the way her hair spilled across the pillow. I could have touched her then. I could have reached out and brushed the strand of hair from her face. But that wasn't the gift. That wasn't the point. Instead, I set something on the nightstand beside her. A mirror. Small, oval, its frame tarnished with age. I angled it carefully, just so, until it reflected her sleeping face. So that when she woke, the first thing she would see was not her ceiling or her curtains, but herself as I saw her. Caught, observed, claimed. I slipped out before dawn. I didn't stay to watch her wake. I didn't need to. I knew. I knew the way her heart would stutter, the way her stomach would twist, the way her mind would shatter as she realized the mirror hadn't been there before. As she realized someone had been inches from her while she slept. As she realized that her face in the glass was the same face I had been watching all along. That day, she didn't scream. She didn't call the police. She didn't call her friend. She sat at her kitchen table for hours, the mirror clutched in her hands, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't eat. She didn't move. She didn't even cry. She had moved past fear. She had stepped into the deeper place. The place where she knew I was real. The place where she knew she was never alone. That night, she tried something new. She turned off every light in the house, every single one, and sat in the dark. She thought maybe if she couldn't see me, I couldn't see her. But darkness is my kingdom. I watched her from the yard, her silhouette barely visible in the black. Her breathing was ragged, uneven. Every so often, her head would jerk toward the window, as though she could feel me pressing against it. She stayed like that for hours, rigid, waiting for me to leave. But I never leave. I never will. And then finally it happened. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment the silence between us broke completely. The moment her fear became certainty. She stood suddenly, violently, and threw open the curtain. The glass separated us by inches, nothing more. Her eyes met mine. Not through shadow. Not through cracks. Not through doubt. She saw me. Truly saw me. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream, her hand flying to her lips. Her body staggered back, crashing into the table, the mirror clattering to the floor. Her eyes never left mine, wide and glassy, reflecting the truth she had fought so long to deny. I raised my hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed my palm flat against the glass. And then she spoke, her voice raw, cracked, broken. "Oh God, you've been watching me." The words hung between us like smoke, thick and choking, but sweet to me. The confession, the truth, the final acknowledgement. She knew. She finally knew. I didn't need to break the glass. I didn't need to enter. I had already won. She had seen me. She had spoken the truth. She could never go back, because once you know you are being watched, you are never alone again. And she will never be alone again. Not as long as I am here. Not as long as she breathes. Not as long as silence still loves me. And silence always does.